Hey everyone, welcome back. I think we've all had that experience where you have that to-do list that's like a mile long and suddenly reorganizing your spice rack seems like the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
Procrastination strikes again. So today we're going to try to go a little deeper than the usual tips and tricks.
Okay.
We're breaking down a guide that gets into like the deeper whys behind procrastination. And trust me, some of these reasons are going to surprise you.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. We tend to think of procrastination as just being lazy, but this guide really challenges that. It suggests that procrastination is actually more often a symptom of something deeper going on,
Okay.
like fear of failure or this need to be perfect or even just difficulty regulating emotions?
Yeah, that's such a good point because it's not always about being lazy. It's about understanding those emotions that are causing you to avoid doing something.
Right.
So what stood out to you as a particularly surprising reason for procrastination?
Well, one thing that really caught my eye was the idea that procrastination can be a form of self-protection.
Oh,
Like if you've had some negative feedback in the past, maybe even criticism about something you've done, you might unconsciously put off doing similar tasks in the future just to avoid the possibility of being hurt again.
wow. Yeah, that's a perspective that I hadn't really considered before.
Yeah,
It makes you realize that procrastination isn't always, a sign of weakness.
right.
It can be a coping mechanism, even if it's not really helpful in the long run.
Exactly.
So how do we start to kind of untangle these emotions and actually get things done? The guide does offer some practical strategies, though,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. And one of the most effective is the 2-minute rule. Have you heard of this one?
I have. It's all about just doing something for like a tiny amount of time.
Yes, exactly. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by a task, challenge yourself to work on it for just 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And it could be something super simple, like making a quick phone call,
Right.
answering a couple of emails, writing the first paragraph of a report, anything like that.
Mm.
The idea is to lower the barrier to entry and build momentum.
Mm.
And often you'll find that once you get started, it's much easier to just keep going.
Yeah, it's like tricking your brain into being productive.
Right.
Speaking of tricks, the guide also mentions visualizing success.
Yes.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so visualizing success is a powerful tool because it really shifts your focus from anxiety and dread to a sense of accomplishment
Okay.
and possibility. So imagine yourself successfully completing the task.
Okay.
How will it feel? What benefits will it bring? By engaging your senses and emotions, you create a more positive association with the task.
Mm.
And that makes it a lot less daunting to approach.
So it's like creating a mental movie where you're the star, achieving your goals and reaping the rewards.
Exactly.
I like it. But, sometimes we need a little extra motivation.
Sure.
Besides just picturing it in our minds, the guide does mention rewards as a key strategy too. What would you suggest for our listeners who need that extra push?
Well, rewards are crucial for reinforcing that positive behavior, and it doesn't have to be anything big or fancy.
Oh,
Maybe it's enjoying a cup of coffee in your favorite spot after finishing a task,
right.
listening to your favorite podcast,
I like that one.
or even just allowing yourself a little guilt-free scroll through social media.
Ooh, yeah. Guilt-free scroll is a good one.
The key is to choose rewards that are personally meaningful and motivating for you.
Yeah, it's all about finding those little things that make the process a bit more enjoyable.
Exactly.
So before we move on to even more strategies for conquering procrastination, I'd love to hear what our listeners think.
Yeah.
Have you tried the 2-minute rule or visualization? What works best for you? Let us know.
It's so interesting how much we focus on motivation. Like, that's the key to overcoming procrastination. But this guide actually highlights something else that's crucial, and that's our environment.
You mean like the physical space where we work? So like having a dedicated home office actually makes a difference?
Well, it's not just about like having a fancy office or anything, although having a dedicated workspace can definitely help.
Hmm.
It's more about being mindful of the cues and triggers in your environment that might be contributing to those procrastination habits.
Okay.
So think about it. If you're trying to write a report while sitting on the couch surrounded by, the TV, video games, all those temptations, it's going to be a lot harder to stay focused, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like you're setting yourself up for success or failure based on like where you choose to be. So
Exactly.
what are some of the tips from the guide for like creating a procrastination-proof workspace?
Well, one suggestion that I really liked is this idea of temptation bundling.
Temptation bundlets,
Okay, so
yeah.
it's about pairing something you enjoy with a task that you've been putting off.
Okay.
So, for example, if you love listening to podcasts, you could save your favorite shiz for when you're tackling those less than thrilling chores or work projects.
Ooh, I like that. It's like bribing yourself with entertainment, but in a productive way.
Yeah.
And speaking of making things more enjoyable, the guide also emphasizes breaking down tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Right. Absolutely. We talked about this a little bit earlier with the 2-minute rule,
Right.
but it applies to those bigger tasks as well. When you're faced with a big, daunting project, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and just want to avoid it altogether.
Yeah.
But if you can break it down into smaller steps, it suddenly feels a lot more approachable.
It's like that saying, how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of us get stuck in that all or nothing mindset where it's like we have to do it all at once.
Right.
But giving yourself permission to start small, I think, can be really empowering.
Absolutely. And each small step you complete builds momentum and a sense of accomplishment.
Mm.
And that makes it easier to keep moving forward.
So we've talked about environment temptation bundling, breaking down tasks. But there's another aspect of procrastination that I think the guide delves into that is so important, and that's perfectionism.
Yeah.
How do we break free from that? That feeling of like, it has to be perfect.
That's a great question, and it's something that so many of us struggle with.
Yeah.
And the guide offers a really helpful perspective on this. It encourages us to shift our focus from achieving perfection to embracing progress.
So progress over perfection.
I like that.
Yeah, it sounds a lot less intimidating, right?
It does. But how do we actually make that shift in our mindset? Are there any practical tips from the guide on that? Yeah. One suggestion is to set realistic expectations.
Okay.
Because perfectionism often stems from those unrealistically high standards that we set for ourselves.
Right.
And that can lead to feelings of inadequacy and ultimately procrastination. So instead of striving for flawlessness, focus on making progress, even if it's just a small step in the right direction.
So it's about celebrating those small wins along the way rather than waiting for that perfect moment.
Exactly. And another powerful technique is to challenge those negative thoughts that are fueling that perfectionism. So, for example, if you find yourself thinking, this has to be perfect, or it's not worth doing at all, try reframing that thought to something like done is better than perfect.
I love that done is better than perfect. It's such a good reminder.
Right.
And I think it ties in nicely with another strategy that the guide mentions, which is self-compassion.
Absolutely. Self-compassion is essential for overcoming procrastination because it allows us to be kind to ourselves when we inevitably slip up. So instead of beating yourself up for procrastinating, acknowledge it without judgment.
Okay.
And simply refocus on getting back on track.
So it's like giving yourself permission to be human.
Exactly.
We're not robots. We're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. We've covered so many different strategies for dealing with procrastination, everything from temptation bundling to self-compassion.
Sure.
But before we wrap up, is there anything else from this guide that you thought was really interesting or important?
You know, one thing that really stood out to me was the emphasis on understanding your why. It sounds pretty basic, but I think sometimes we get so caught up in the tasks themselves that we forget the bigger picture. The reason why we're doing them in the first place.
Right. So it's about connecting with the purpose behind our action.
Exactly. When you have that sense of purpose, it can be incredibly motivating. So let's say you're procrastinating on a work project.
Okay.
Take a minute to remind yourself why it's important. Is it contributing to a larger goal that you're really passionate about?
Right.
Will it help you develop some new skills or advance your career? By tapping into that deeper why, you can reframe the task, from something that feels like a chore to an opportunity.
I love that. It's like finding that spark of inspiration again.
Yeah.
To get you going. And speaking of inspiration, the guide also mentions this technique of visualizing the process, which I found really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Visualizing the process is so powerful, especially for people who tend to feel overwhelmed by big tasks.
Right.
So instead of focusing only on the end result, you actually mentally walk through each step involved in completing the task.
So it's like creating a mental roadmap,
Yeah.
breaking the journey into smaller, more manageable steps.
Exactly. And by mentally rehearsing the process, you not only reduce those feelings of overwhelm, but you also increase your sense of control and confidence. And you might even be able to identify potential obstacles or challenges in advance, which gives you a chance to come up with solutions before you even get started.
Wow, that's incredibly helpful. It's like being proactive about procrastination. So as we wrap up our look at this guide, do you have any final piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, just remember that overcoming procrastination is a journey, not a destination.
Mm.
There will be times when you slip up, and that's okay. The key is to be kind to yourself.
Okay.
Learn from those moments and just keep experimenting with different strategies to find what really works for you. And if you enjoyed this exploration of procrastination and found these tips helpful, please click that like button and subscribe for more insightful conversations on all sorts of topics. Thanks for joining us.